we start the presentation, I just want to take you back to last month's meeting where we went over the status of the fiscal year 2019 financials. And as we reported to you, the revenues are on target, the expenditures are as expected, and we're projecting a balanced budget this year as well as a modest surplus. And we also wanted to point out to you, based on this current year's enrollment, we had just developed the budget based on 1.8% budget assumption. We know the actual enrollments came in around below that, but the shortfall that they created was more than made up by the additional state revenues and budget adjustments we made throughout the course of the year. So that takes us to the current year. The budget strategies for this year, as Dr. Sudek mentioned, we're basing our work on the new strategic pillars that the board's developing. And in particular, the last item, strategic use of resources, you'll see is evident throughout the presentation. Back in the February board retreat, we also developed the board budget priorities of student success, enrollment growth, capacity building, infrastructure and resource development, and finally, organizational viability. So these four priorities were embedded into our work. And as a leadership team, when we heard the 28 departmental presentations, we worked really hard to make sure every cent counted, and we identified very specific strategies to work our way through the work, including looking at compliance, looking at revenue opportunities, looking at cost-saving opportunities, and baking that into our efforts. In terms of the budget itself, we know that $111 million is a large number, and it's made up of almost a little over 63% in local property tax revenues. The next big component is student tuition and fees, which is about 28%. And then finally, the next main component is the state funding component, about 7% of our budget. In terms of property taxes, we covered, the board approved the levies back in the late fall, or around November, December timeframe. And so that baked that into our assumption. State funding, we were using very conservative assumptions of state funding for this year of $7.2 million, plus a fairly substantial vocational education grant. And as with this year's budget, if there's any changes, we will come back to the board and make adjustments as they present themselves. And then finally, in this year's budget, we're assuming a minus 1.7% enrollment decline. The board did approve a $3 per credit hour in tuition increase, bringing our total per credit hour revenues to $144 per credit hour. And then total revenues about $30.6 million for tuition. And then in terms of the budget itself, we know that we're starting off strong. We're planning on ending strong. We're currently above the board's policy target of 30%. So towards the end of the presentation, you'll see some suggestions that the leadership team has in terms of how to use some of these available resources. In terms of spending, a big portion of our spending is salaries and benefits. Also, we worked hard to reallocate existing funds to meet the needs that were baked into our budget. $1.2 million is reallocated to support our enrollment growth plan. Another $1.1 million was reallocated to support personnel and non-personnel requests. And then finally, we also carried forward some growth and innovation funds that were approved this year. And the bulk of that altogether comprises our $111 million operating budget. In terms of expenditure highlights, this budget is about a 3% increase over the prior year. Personnel expenditures make up about 4% of that increase. It's about $82.8 million and includes bargaining and non-bargaining for salary increases. New position requests total about $1.5 million. The health insurance is only growing at 7.1%. As you recall from the board planning retreat, that we thought that was going to be north of 9%. So the Employee Benefit Committee did a good job helping us control that cost. The non-personnel portion of our budget is growing at a modest 1%. This budget will also maintain a $1.5 million contingency, and we are funding our debt service obligations in this budget. In terms of the new positions, my colleagues and I would like to at least highlight for you what we're baking into this year's assumption. In terms of my new office, the Business and Services Office, we have a grounds position and facilities that we're adding to meet the growing maintenance of our facility. We're also recommending a compliance manager to strengthen our internal auditing capabilities. And then we're also going to be adding a campus services team lead in one of our enterprise funds areas. In terms of information technology, Greg, you want to say a few words about that?
Yep, you may recall that in February, early February, I gave a presentation on an IT assessment that talked about trying to shift IT to be much more focused in on student success rather than on technology for its own sake. In that presentation, I talked about 13 positions in IT that would be used to take us from focusing on that treadmill of managing technology to really enabling technology to be a driver of mission for the college. Those 13 positions, if we had gone with all of them, would have still made the CLC IT organization only 82% the size of our comparator organizations of local colleges here in Lake County. But of those 13, we thought that 6 were critical this year to begin to build out the capacity of the IT organization. So of those 6, 3 of them immediately support capacity improvements. That's the intermediate network engineer and systems engineer and the system and application administrator. The IT organization is experiencing the fact that more and more solutions in the college are relying on technology as a core part of their enablement of the student-oriented programs we're putting in place here. We'll hear about more of those tonight. Those 3 help reduce the backlog of projects that are consistently piling up at IT's doorstep to help get more of those projects through. The desktop support position in Lakeshore acknowledges the fact that as we look at the Lakeshore Promise and try to make that campus more fulsome in what it offers, many of those things rely on technology as well, beginning with an ability to start to bridge classes together between Grayslake and Lakeshore through the use of video conferencing, and expanding all the way through to new technologies in service of student learning, such as the new mechatronics lab. All those things require technology and somebody on site to support the technology during the time when classes are offered. So that allows us to have the capacity to do that. The next item, the information security engineer. I appreciate the fact that a year ago you all approved the hiring of an IT security manager. One of the challenges with anything like that is you start to pay attention to that in a world in which organizations are increasingly under attack from cyber criminals, is that if you start to turn over rocks and you see slithery and slimy things crawling around, you have an obligation to start to address that because you've now become aware of that. So this gives us the capacity to not only drive the security strategy in alignment with the Moran security audit that you approved a couple years ago, but to actually take action on resolving and remediating the things we find. And the final thing is an IT finance administrator. We talked about process improvements as a way to operational effectiveness and efficiency. This role is really acknowledging 2 flaws or opportunities for improvement in the IT processes. One has to do with the technology lifecycle, from the moment we acquire or desire technology to its disposal. I've been working with Ken and his team to try and identify a reliable and efficient IT purchasing process so that we're providing his purchasing team the appropriate information to get the things in here that we need in an efficient way, all the way through to disposal, where we've identified a number of products that languish in our vaults before we get rid of them. Every day something sits retired from our use but not redistributed into the environment of the Lake County community is lost revenue for the college. Those things depreciate rapidly over time. And so the goal will be to start to try and get disposal happening quarterly. The final piece of that has to do with our asset management, which has been shown as part of our audit. And unfortunately, occasionally we run into situations where our assets are not only poorly managed, but sometimes are stolen. And again, once you uncover something by turning a rock over, there's an obligation to fix that. And so a key part of this role is to do the asset management to start to make sure we're getting the most out of the things that you allow us to purchase as a college.
Thank you, Greg. Next is Educational Affairs.
Yeah, question. What is our exposure to ransomware?
Sure. There are a lot of
How
different...
how does this new team protect us more for
Sure.
that infiltration?
There are many different threats, ransomware being one of them, but probably for us as a college not to ignore it, but it's not the biggest risk. Fortunately, what we do is we back up our data, in some cases continuously, our PeopleSoft database. So every nanosecond, we have another copy in our South Lake Center. So if something happened to that data here, we'd be able to recover it. Other pieces of information, like the storage of files and other things we create, we back up every night. So if ransomware took over this network, we would be able to restore as of midnight last night. So ransomware is something that's a real threat. Our bigger issue is losing the personally indicative information that our students and staff have entrusted to our care, and having that exposed on the larger internet, the dark web, in which it's used for all sorts of purposes that make us feel like we're not being proper stewards of the data that our students entrust to us, along with many other things that are consistently under attack here as a college.
And that was one of the biggest issues that was brought up when I went to a conference out in Portland, Oregon, was the cybersecurity issue and how easy it is for people to get into various systems, like going through your HVAC system and
Right.
piggybacking off of that. And
In 2018, cybercrime represented a $6 trillion industry. Just by way of comparison, that's larger than the global drug trade. So it's a very profitable endeavor for people who want to enter into it. We're not teaching that here, but we'll teach how to protect ourselves from it as part of a new curriculum as well. Very good.
Next, educational affairs.
So for educational affairs, I'll just start by noting that that estimated amount really takes into consideration work that the team did to reallocate funds, leverage grant funding, which is partially supporting several of these roles, and also leverage revenue accounts that we have here at the college that are generated through student work. So I'll start with the South Lake position. That really is around the goal of capacity building to ensure that we've got a sustainable and consistent position in the afternoon and evenings at South Lake. So what we're doing is we're taking two 24-hour-a-week positions and combining them for one 40-hour-a-week position. So it's a full reallocation opportunity there. Along the lines of lab specialist positions, the five programs that are represented through lab coordinator or specialist positions here include auto collision repair, our automation, robotics, and mechatronics program, electrical engineering technologies, horticulture, and our culinary program. And really those represent some of our smaller programs that can better meet our workforce needs by ensuring that we have full-time lab specialists that are helping maintain industry-relevant labs. These, again, are smaller programs in terms of faculty, so it's going to get our faculty in the classroom and with our students by effectively managing the lab environments through these lab specialist positions. So around student success and then supporting the enrollment growth goals that we have in all those program areas. For adult education, that's really pivotal to think about enrollment growth and also student success in that area. The outreach and recruitment coordinator position will have specific targets to help increase enrollment in adult education and also help transition and bridge students into our career program areas that are called ICAPS programs, really important transition supports for students in those areas. The Enrichment Center coordinator will have specific targets related to improving our post-test scores for adult education students, which allows them to demonstrate learning that will advance them to the next level of adult education course. And that central coordination through a physical enrichment center that has alignment between the student support softwares and the curriculum in the classroom, that enrichment center coordinator will help bridge between faculty and students in that learning opportunity. So again, grant funding will also help support those two adult education positions. So that's a quick overview for educational affairs. Any questions before?